Hello. In the DAZ community, I am known as Bohemian3. I am creating a series of videos on how to use traditional pattern making techniques for DAZ characters using Marvelous Designer. This video focuses in on the sloper. In traditional pattern making techniques, you start with a template, the sloper, shaped to a very specific characters. As we begin going through how to use a sloper, all garment patterns will seem to emerge from it. As a quick example, here is a sloper I created for Michael 8. To create a suit, I identified the cuts that need to be made, and then I cut the pattern and moved the pieces around to get the final volume and silhouette I wanted for the suit. The techniques suggested here are adapted from the following two books, Metric Cutting for Women's Wear and Pattern Making for Menswear, both available in digital formats from multiple online booksellers. In addition to being a standard practice in pattern making, the advantages of a sloper for 3D artists include increased productivity, better fit, and more authentic results. The thing to understand when you create patterns in Marvelous Designer is seams and eternal lines dictate the geometry that's generated, and that geometry drives better folds and draping in the cloth engine. In the fashion industry and in these videos, there are two words that come up all the time, silhouette and volume. I will be using these often as I begin talking about the sloper and other patterns. A few hints to begin with. We are going to be using existing sloper examples. Don't worry about matching them exactly. We're going to let your figure drive what your final sloper looks like. Check your silhouette always, focus on capturing volume, and we will talk about this in a little while. Use the strain map tool all the time. So let's jump into Marvelous Designer. For the rest of the video, this is what I will be talking about. There are two preferences that I want to make you aware of. Under Settings, Preferences, under 2D, I would recommend a default particle distance of 8, and under 3D, I recommend, especially if you're going to DAZ, to use quads. So change the mesh default to quads. Now we're going to be adding some reference elements. The first thing we're going to do is add a background image of a sample sloper to guide us as we build out our own. I'm going to hit F4 to hide the grid lines. Next, we're going to scale this image. Now, it's important to remember we do not want to trace this image. We want to use it as a guide to build out our own sloper based on this figure. So I'm going to get a measurement reference using the measure tool, basic tape measure, and I'm going to measure shoulder here. And so I see it's 5.5. I'm going to create a pattern guide that will help me match the scale of the background image to our model scale. One of the things I'm going to do is go into Display, 2D Pattern Rendering Style, and change it to Opaque Surface so I can see what's going on underneath the pattern. And I'm going to go ahead and add a background image and change the scale to 110. And the opacity so I can better try to match this background image to the scale of the model. And then I'm going to move that out of the way. Again, we're not going to try to trace this. We're going to use it as a guide. So I'm going to delete this. It was just meant to help as a guide. And now I'm going to start building out the sloper. First thing I'm going to do is get a measurement around the neck using the circumference tool under measurement tools, and I see it's 15. So what I'm going to do is take half of that and I'm going to create a pattern piece that's 7.5 inches in width and 1 inch in height. And what I'm going to do is hit Shift F to see my pattern reference points, and I'm going to move that into place here. It doesn't have to be perfect. Then I'm going to create a symmetric pattern with sewing. And then I'm going to use the segment sewing tool to sew those two pattern pieces together. Then I'm going to hit the space bar to simulate. And what this does is it gives us a basic reference point for the collar. One of the things I want to do here is go into the skin offset for the model and change that to 0.5 so that we get a better fit here. And this is going to help us draw out our sloper. Next, we're going to create a pattern reference guide for the arm. I'm going to use the basic circumference measure tool again to get a measurement of his biceps. And I'm going to create a pattern piece, rectangle, of 15 width, 1 inch height. Then I'm going to move that into place. Shift F shows the pattern arrangement points. Then I'm going to use the segment tool to join those ends together and simulate. When it falls like that, there is something that you can do to help keep it on the model. Add some pressure so that it will stay close to the model. And finally, we're going to actually start drawing the sloper. We're going to be using the line avatar tool for that. And what we're going to do is start drawing out the basic sloper pattern. And what we're looking to do here is capture volume. See here how I put the collar pattern reference to help guide where the neck should be. So I'm going to draw the front sloper out. I recommend you don't try to draw the entire sloper piece all in one. Do smaller pieces that capture the volume. And then we can do some editing. We're going to edit the line. This point here I want to move over a little. And just tweak. It's kind of like a cage on his chest. Then we're ready to flatten those pieces. So you highlight them and then you press enter to flatten them. And if you notice, it creates a real mess over here. You're going to have to move them into place. This one is altogether upside down. And this is the side piece. Now the important thing is we're not going to be using these. Once again, what I'm trying to do is create a guide for us to create our final sloper. So now what I'm going to do is position these with the example sloper that we have. I'm going to go back and turn on my opaque surface. And what we're going to do is, notice we're somewhat in the ballpark, but there's a couple of really interesting things. I've learned that the models from DAZ have a lot of volume on the back. So when we draw out the back sloper, you'll see what I mean. So now I'm going to draw out the back sloper. I'm going to go back to my line tool. Now I'm going to flatten those pieces. And move them into place here. Again, I'm looking for a guide. And again, we're not going to try to match the sample sloper exactly. We're going to try to build out our sloper based on these flattened pieces that capture the volume. Now you could go ahead and try to edit these out, but what I do is I just create a new pattern piece. So I just create a new rectangle. I'm going to add a few points into the rectangle. And then move things around. The curve tool in Marvelous Designer is amazing. And what I'm beginning to do is get a pattern piece sloper that looks more like the sample, but it's based on the volume of the model itself. Now I'm going to do the same for the back. Now I have found that in creating slopers for DAZ characters, the 3D meshes seem to have a lot of volume in the back, so I found oftentimes the back sloper piece is higher than the front. So again, I'm just trusting my model. I'm not basing it exactly on the existing pattern. Then I can delete these pieces. I can move this into place. And then move this pattern piece into place. I'm going to create a symmetric pattern with sewing for both of them. Then I'm going to sew the segments together. And then, of course, because I have symmetric sewing on, both sides are being done at once. And now I'm going to simulate. And then out of box, it's not awful, but you're going to have to now do a lot of tweaking until this pattern piece fits flat on your model. The last thing we're going to do is capture the volume for the sleeves, and I will not cover it in this video, but then you're going to start building out the sleeves sloper piece based on the example, but using the actual geometry of the model to guide the final pattern. Here is the final sloper I created for Michael 8. One of the main things you're going to want to note is the strain map. It's not unusual to have some strain under the arms, but overall you want to make sure the pattern fits flat on the model without a lot of strain. Otherwise, when you go to manipulate the sloper, you will have a lot of problems. The other thing you don't want to use in the sloper is the steam tool. You don't use that until the final stages of your production. To start using your sloper in actual patterns, you can reference the books I mentioned at the beginning of this. They have very detailed explanations of how to take your sloper and turn it into a pattern. That concludes this video. Thanks for listening, and good luck in creating your own slopers for your characters to create your future patterns.